And now I'd like to call on stage our guest of honor, Leanne McMillan, who's the Director for Global Programs at Stonewall, UK. We'd like to invite her to come and deliver the keynote.
Hello, good morning. I've decided to stand here because I'm a bit jet lagged, so I hope you don't mind that I don't wander across the stage. How exciting. It's wonderful to be here. I can only thank our hosts who have very generously included Stonewall in this event. I'm seeing a lot of friendly faces in the room. I've met a lot of people who work with the companies that we work with globally. It's great to hear the comments from my colleagues earlier about how to make sure that we provide leadership within organizations. And I'm here as a person who works in the very, very rare space of working at an NGO, a non-governmental organization, working with both businesses as well as civil society in order to create models for moving communities forward, and that includes business. I think there's a bit of an echo. Is it better if I just use this? Can you hear me? Okay, there's a light. I think it's really important to actually recognize the moment that we're in right now, and to actually be taking a few steps back as well, and to look around the world and see actually how does change happen. And it's my pleasure today, it might be a bit of a cold shower for some of you after a lot of the positive things that have been said, to actually just step back a bit and look at actually the state of the world. I've been asked very clearly to talk about what's happening in other contexts, because I think that brings important lessons to us about actually how change happens, and to look at actually how we can plan from our own places here in India how to move things forward. In some respects, I'm not sure all of you are familiar with Stonewall, but basically we are one of the elders in the nonprofit, the NGO sector of LGBTI advocacy globally. We've been doing this work for 31 years. We celebrated 30 years last year. And basically we started off as a campaigning organization, very much working to change the laws in the UK, and to work very hard to change the kind of attitudes and the communities that we needed in order to get the kind of legislative changes that we needed. We have pushed for acceptance without exception for LGBTI people for all of those years. And along the way, we've had to change course, and we've had to try new strategies to engage those who can create change. That includes both communities as well as the kind of leaders that we need in place in both business and in government. I want to appeal today to the many of you in this room today who might not see yourself as leaders. There are some people who are clearly, I love the term C-suite. We don't have C-suites in the NGO sector, but if we did, I'd really love to be part of it, because I think it's really important to express your leadership as a member of the LGBTI community, and to make sure that things happen and that we can create change within our spaces. But I think it's also important to look at, actually, I understand there's some students here, there's some job seekers here, there's some people that do the daily work of diversity and inclusion, and grappling with the challenges that we have to create the basis of change, to create the spaces for new policies, for practices, for bringing people along on this journey. So I think at Stonewall we've learned some things along the way. We work with over 800 employers, and with a network of civil society organizations that span the globe. We work on a broad range of issues, going from gender recognition, where we're having some very clear challenges at home, to working with civil society actors in countries around the world who are looking at some of those who are forgotten, in particular lesbians, bisexual women, and transgender people. So in doing this work, we're really aware of the vagaries of LGBTI people that they face in being able to claim their rights. And more importantly, how they're not able to claim their rights, because we know that there's a lot of challenges. I really wanted to bring a brief message of the state of the world, looking at it from the perspective of laws and the leadership work that we need, not just from within the community that's in this room today, but also from within those who have power and political power to create change. I think that we do need to focus clearly on how to right the wrongs of the past, and to understand that those wrongs persist, that there's very big difference in terms of the settings that we are all in between what we find at work, what we find at home, what we find in urban landscapes, and what we find in rural landscapes. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be like basically giving you a sad tale. It just means to say that we need to be clear about the pace of change and to be clear about how we set our objectives and look forward to creating change. From where I sit looking at the globe, I have to say sometimes it feels like things are moving at a glacial pace. There's more that needs to be fixed than is already fixed and that we've had as by a way of achievement. But I think if we look back to that momentous day in September of 2018, a landmark day here in India, all of us who are activists in this area were sitting around the world watching to find out what would happen in here. And I can tell you that we were all celebrating with you to see the end to what was a very, very grim legacy. I think it's also important to know that today's a very enervating day. We're all coming here, working on a Saturday, declaring our interest in this work, but this work can be exhausting, and we need to be able to look after ourselves. It's just so much to do as we try to deliver on the human rights of LGBTI people across nations, and India is a very big part of that. There's a lot of global companies here that we really need to be able to appeal to the global leaders that we actually have access to. I'm going to try this. Wow. Again, it's important that we lift our gaze and that we look at the world that we live in and reflect a bit on the size of the challenge. As you know, it's both a good news and a bad news story. The key to understanding this map of the state of the world is to look for the blue. And unfortunately, there isn't as much blue as we would like to see. The blue represents those countries where there is constitutional protection and broad legal protection. This is a foundation on which to build societies of equality and non-discrimination across all identities in those countries. The other countries of interest are those where there's 73 who offer employment protection. However, that's not enough in terms of even the business base of the global corporations that are in this room today. We know that being able to work opens the doors for many people to a life where they can have more opportunities to express their diversity and to basically pursue a path of equality. But we know that actually if there's no employment protection, and in many states, 55, there's no protection at all of any form, but there's also no criminalization. And it's odd that we should even be thinking that we have to welcome that news. At least there's no criminalization. And I think that where all of our hearts will sink is when we imagine the consequences of the LGBTI community that live in the 70 countries where same-sex relations continue to be criminalized, with sanctions ranging from 10 years to life imprisonment in 11 countries where the death penalty is even possible. It's not a revelation to say, in understanding this map, that much has been achieved, but that there's still lots to do. And I wanted to focus on just take a very quick romp through the key developments that have happened in 2019 that show us that there is some change underway, most of it based on a combination of actors who have pulled together relentlessly to pursue those changes. I think one of the key takeaways of today has to be that as we work at the interface with LGBTI communities across all of the businesses that are here today, that we need to recognize that we need to have a community that stands behind it. Because you'll see a lot of the pushback comes very much from communities that don't want to seek change and governments that very much endorse that position. So some of the good news can be seen in the camp of Angola, where they decriminalized same-sex conduct. In Kenya, the Court of Appeal at least decided that LGBTI groups could officially register, which will make a huge change for the ability of LGBTI communities to coalesce and to continue to pursue the legislative change that they're looking for. In Korea, the National Human Rights Commission recognized a third gender. That was officially sanctioned. Taiwan became the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. The World Health Organization basically concluded in its ICD, which is the official, the Global Manual of Diagnosis, that no longer defines being trans as a mental disorder. We've seen some changes in Botswana, where they overturned the colonial era law criminalizing same-sex relations. In Brazil, the Supreme Court has actually decriminalized discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. In Bermuda, we saw the first ever Pride Parade, which was hosted in the middle of the summer, and over 6,000 people attended. We see many other positive changes in countries around the world that are too many to number, but they basically follow some areas where we can all continue to push, knowing and being hopeful that there are precedents being set. And it's very interesting and important to keep up with them. People are creating changes in their access to education, to be able to give key messages in schools. Some of that work is taking place here in India. Some of that work needs to be picked up and it needs to be amplified. But I think on the other side, we need to look at actually the trends that we're seeing globally that affect the work that all of us do, whether we're in civil society or whether we're in business, that are actually showing some trends that are very, very downward. So we know that there are some countries where there's continuing repression and criminal sanctions, and even in one, death by stoning has been introduced as punishment for sexual acts between people of the same sex and adulterers. Some courts continue to uphold bans on same-sex conduct. There are new penal codes being introduced with provisions that formalize a number of laws against LGBT people. Members of Parliament are reneging on promises to decriminalize same-sex conduct after criticism from religious organizations. LGBT activists have been charged with the crime of same-sex conduct, punishable by up to life in prison and imprisonment of up to 15 years for same-sex conduct. Courts have upheld a ban on same-sex marriage and civil partnerships following judicial review. I'm not mentioning companies because I don't think it's for me and it's not appropriate to mention those companies, or countries, pardon me. But I think that we need to actually recognize that there are trends that I think we need to be surprised about in 2020, where we have the state, we have politicians, we have courts, and in some basic groups that label themselves as faith organizations that are really not ready to accept that love is love and that all human beings are equal. But the law and the legislative change and what we pursue through courts is clearly not the only determining factor of the lived experience of LGBTI people around the world. The social landscape around the world shows us that 20-25% of people think that equal rights should not be applied to everyone. The UN independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity, Mr. Victor Madrigal-Borlos, which is a position that we fought hard for and have fought hard with states to retain, has found that LGBT and gender nonconforming people face the near certainty of suffering violence during their lives. Let's pause and think about what that means in terms of the communities that we are involved in and the numbers of people that represents. We also need to be really aware that different peoples within our own LGBTI family, they experience very different and unique challenges in terms of discrimination. A lot of you are starting to work on the basis of taking intersectional approaches. It's really important to recognize how all of our identities affect how we will be treated and the sort of certainty that we can expect in life, and basically to understand whether or not we will face discrimination. I would particularly want to call out the challenges that we face in terms of ensuring that trans people are able to to gain their rights by people, very much a forgotten community within the LGBTI community, let alone in the broader human rights discourse. We need to examine, and in your work, you need to, I think, as you're saying a lot of positive things about the leadership piece and how you actually create change through your organizations, but we need to be able to look at the experiences between, class, age, ability, ethnicities, and faiths. And I think from what I've heard today, there's definitely goodwill, but I hope that what I'm trying to show is that it's a long haul, and we need to hold ourselves accountable to the goals that we set, and not just actually think that with goodwill it's going to happen, because there are very serious and sustained groups out there that are pushing against us. I don't know if some of you have seen the work that is done by the Global Philanthropy Project, but I always feel that it really needs to be mentioned, because they have done a very, very intensive mapping of what's happening with faith-based organizations, and they're putting billions of dollars into what is called the anti-gender movement to move against us. So I really feel like I'm kind of ruining the moment in a way after the wonderful speeches this morning about, what we can do as leadership, but I think that we need to bear all of this in mind, and as we progress during the day, what is it that we can practically do to face up to these very, very real challenges? There's not a problem of laws. We don't have a problem of international standards in terms of international human rights. Let's go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It explicitly states that every individual and every organ of society should strive to promote respect for human rights. The business community has really stepped up. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that were adopted in 2011 outline the responsibilities of businesses to respect human rights. This includes the need to prevent, address, and remedy human rights abuses caused by their activities. The responsibility extends to all businesses and exists independently of the willingness or capacity of states to meet their own legal obligations in this regard. Again, the UN standards for the conduct for business, they've got really long titles, these, for tackling discrimination against lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and intersex people, sets out clearly the responsibilities businesses have to address the discrimination LGBT people face globally. UN bodies have repeatedly confirmed that human rights obligations to protect everyone from discrimination includes discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. I'm a human rights lawyer of 30 years vintage, and I have to say that sometimes those words and those promises on paper ring very hollow when we look at how states are acting. And it's really hard to reconcile the lack of leadership politically across nations. This is a global challenge we have. And I find it very interesting to be having this conversation today, sitting in this hotel, guests of Lali, which has, through legacy, leadership, and a system-wide dedication to inclusion, arguably done more than many states. And I think we need to look, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a fan, I have to say, and a bit of a groupie too, but anyway, this was planned. I wanted to say this. But I think we need to applaud that effort, and I think that they also have a cute little elephant that reminds us all of their stance against inequality and for honoring diversity. These kinds of individual and corporate actions are vital, and we need to tell the world about them, and we need to call for shame those that have the political power who do nothing to create a world that is going to be better for all of us within this LGBTI community. So we know that employers and civil society and governments and leaders are fundamentally, all have an important leadership role to play in the vacuum that is left by others. At Stonewall, we've developed a theory of change, and I wanted to share with you because it's very much based on the lessons that we've learned from the legacy of those who have fought to deliver and claim rights for the 30 years that we've been in existence. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's something I would like you to take away, that we found that we need to deliver on all of these 4 aspects in order to achieve change. You can't really do one without the other. So you've heard a lot this morning about empowering individuals. I mean, clearly you need leadership. And I really do applaud the efforts of the corporations that have stepped up and created those kinds of leadership approaches. And they ring true on the promises that they make to their staff by actually empowering those leaders to create change. A number of the companies that we work with have LGBTI leadership programs where they give people who are of the community an opportunity to come together and to look at their journey. And I've been part of those sessions, and the journeys that people have had are actually quite extraordinary when you think of the challenges that they've faced at home, at school, in their community, in the workplace, hiding at certain points in their career because it wouldn't be strategic and it would end their career if they were to be coming out. Finally feeling the freedom of being in an organization that honors who they are for what they do and not for who they love. So we know that there is a very important piece of work that needs to be done in terms of empowering individuals. But we also know, as I've tried to show you, that we need to change laws and policies, which can be tedious, and at all times it is very challenging work. We need to create the legislative changes that can support us in the workplace. It cannot be that companies are left to deliver on human rights where states don't. They will if they have to, but that is absolutely upside down. It is up to government to lead. They're the ones that create laws. They need to deliver on them, and they need to create the space for people to live within what are the most basic and fundamental of human rights that are guaranteed to us all. So clearly, paper promises need to be put into practice. As you will see, the major pushback that we are facing is and continues to be from communities. And we know that this is a change process that can take decades in certain contexts. But we need to always engage in this project of changing hearts and minds. We need to be able to bring the voices of LGBT people to the fore, and we need to give them the space to say, who they are, what they want, and why they shouldn't have, no one should have to out themselves. I'm not suggesting that, but we should actually provide that sort of space for people to, to actually explain why it is that the laws that are in place, the community reaction that they receive isn't acceptable. Because in all of my experience of doing this work for 30 years, what really changes laws and sits underneath a lot of the practical changes is when people get it. If they see a person that they can relate to, they will understand the need to make change. You saw the testimonials. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I was sitting over here in the corner crying because those are the brave people who are standing up and saying what it means to them to be able to be included in the workplace and to actually be their authentic self. You heard Tony this morning speak about authentic self. There's a lot of science behind that. We know that if a person can bring their authentic self to the workplace, they're going to be happier employers. They're going to be more productive. They're going to stay with the organization longer. So we do know, we've tested over time how we need to do this work. My sense is that we should do it because of human dignity. Of course I would say that. I work with civil society, but it is absolutely everything we do needs to be rooted in a value and a vision that is about the dignity of all people. So I think that by working with employers from both across the public and the private sector, which is what we do at Stonewall to try and transform institutions, we also need to not be a bit naive about it. We need to look at actually mechanisms for accountability, because on the one hand, businesses like to be held accountable because they like to compete, which is great. We like that. We like people trying to, endeavor to be the best that they can be. But we also need to actually look at very practical measures of what it means to be an inclusive employer. It's not something, there's a lot of diversity and inclusion people here. It's not just something we wish, and because we're a good leader and we're, open and diverse ourselves, that is actually going to create that magic. within the organization. So I think from the point of view of what we've learned at Stonewall over the years, we actually work with over 800 employers. 200 of them are global employers, and we index about half of those. And as it now stands, in terms of our global employers, we actually have access to understanding what the lives are of 1.5 million people through that index. So we find that that method of accountability is going to be the thing that will take us forward. And it's a question of actually not calling organizations out. It's not about making people wrong. We have a large team sitting in London that works daily with companies on helping them to get it right. It is absolutely clear that we actually, we need to move forward together. We need to understand that things take time, but we also have to set some clear targets and hold each other accountable. I guess one of the things that was said earlier was about how to bring business leaders together as a community, and I think that that's happening in some contexts where in the face of government inaction or of a legislative environment that is completely not going to change or is going to be very challenging for the next few years, we see a lot of good practice, and it was mentioned earlier this morning by Amex about bringing together business leaders who can come together and actually join forces in order to strategically push things forward. We've just published a book which is about actually the advocacy role that high-level business leaders need to take, and they do play a very important role in society, and they actually have access to influence and voices that many of us in civil society don't. So we actually do call upon them to use that voice. We know it takes time, and I think we also need to reflect all along the piece in order to have the energy to sustain this kind of work, that many of us motivated by personal journeys in this work, where we've been excluded. We know what it's like to be shunned. Many are victims of violence in some of the contexts that we're working in. Many can't get jobs. Some struggle to access education. Some simply can't have, a family life. And all we really want is to live a life of dignity. So I think we need to always look on our own journeys, and because of our identity, to look at why we're excluded and what that has meant to us. And be reminded of both those painful and promising stories that will actually help us to understand the importance of the work that we do in order to sustain ourselves in what is deeply challenging work. I think that one of the things that people there's assumptions made about what it's like to live in certain countries and do this work. And I work in the United Kingdom. We're a team of 150 people, and we've been pushing for the last couple years for Gender Recognition Act changes. We face hate speech, we get hate mail, we have to hire security guards in order to run some of our programs. It reminds us all that there is really, unfortunately, no safe space, sadly, because of some of the pushback and because some of the, the sort of powerful forces that are there who are working actively against our own interests, and we need to be mindful of that. So I think that if we look at the level of connection and we look at what these sort of, 4 ways of working, it's the transforming institutions piece that I think is, really relevant today. And to look at actually, if we don't do this piece, if we don't make these changes, what we see. I mean, I work daily with communities that are on the margins of society. I worked just even a couple weeks ago with, unfortunately, a trans woman who had to flee her country because she couldn't be safe there, is now living in a refugee camp, trying to learn a new language, has a professional level education, and is actually on a daily basis trying to figure out what the next steps in her life will be. Other people, they're forced to immigrate. They feel that, they've got that capacity, they have that power. Mercifully, they have that opportunity to just go elsewhere to live their lives, free from the accountability that might come from their family or the pressure that there is to be someone who they're not. So I think that if we look at going from the big picture to the big globe and what's going on, and what it is that we can do and what motivates us and what the pressures are that we face, I think we do need to actually be really a bit angry about the failures of the world to protect LGBTI people. We've put in place a lot of things that should be enabling us to do that. And I think that this work can often feel overwhelming, but I think what we're doing today is really important by exploring this nexus between civil society actors and employers that can be channeled in very powerful ways. You're going to hear later on from my colleagues at Open for Business on channels of influence. We actually can, working together, have a lot of power to change. But I hope that I've made a plea for doing this work only in connection with the local society, oftentimes best represented by the local civil society and NGO community. So today here in Delhi, we have essentially the firmest expression of a community that's moving forward together. Fantastic. It didn't take that long, really, considering it's only a couple years ago that the change was made in terms of the actions of the court. I just wanted to extend that as Stonewall, we stand behind you. We reach out in friendship always. We've been working with colleagues here for the last couple of years, trying to find a way that we can very practically move forward together. So in terms of how we can practically move forward together, it's very much working according to this theory of change. But we did want to today do something more than actually do the cheeky Stonewall thing, which is say, let's put on a t-shirt, and this is the kind of thing that we often do. Don't forget our theory of change is basically have that kind of in-your-face stuff of like, some people are gay, get over it. We recognize that that's something that works in the UK, and by the way, there's one for every sexual orientation as well as gender expression. What works there is clearly not going to work, in other contexts. So for that very reason, we are very keen to work very practically, building on our 30 years of experience and the 800 employers that we've worked with, to look very clearly at how to create an index that would work here in India. Indexes are very clear measurements of how to move forward. They are a system of accountability. They allow you to monitor and evaluate. They do a lot of practical things like help you figure out which policies and benefits you need to have in place. They guide you on what training you might need to do. They do a lot about staff engagement, and I think one of the most powerful things that you'll find that indexing does is it gives you a powerful basis upon which to say, this is where we need improvement, this is what I can do as a leader, this is my role as a diversity and inclusion person, and this is what I can do to create a staff network. Many of us grew up in the staff networks in organizations, and it's the staff networks that we have seen grow over time, and they are revolutionary. They create huge change. When things kick off in a certain country where there's a repressive measure, you can bet that the staff networks in those companies, the multinationals, are going to step up. And I see some nodding heads, and that within the internal mechanism of an organization, the best thing you can have is for your own staff to be holding you accountable and to basically say, this isn't good enough, but to stand with you in terms of how you're going to improve it. And sometimes that means shifting where your investments might go. Sometimes that may mean that you're not going to be able to be as profitable, and I'm not being anti-business here, I'm just saying that in some of the contexts where you have operations, it's going to be the way that they're treating LGBTI people will be antithetical to your vision and values as diverse and inclusive employers. So indexing helps you to actually look at a pathway to make progress. So I really wanted to take this moment in time to call my colleagues to this podium to get rid of the bus, and I'm looking for Monsieur Suri. Now, why did I go into French all of a sudden? I don't know. I was just like, maybe it's the glasses. Mr. Keshav Suri to come here, and Ram, and where are my colleagues in Pride? So there you are. I couldn't see you because of the light. So please come to the stage. I was hoping these are like you're good. These are like Michael Jackson steps here, I think. So after that sort of grim tour of the universe, how are you feeling? I hope you're not too sad. I hope you're enervated. Yes, you're coming here, please. We haven't rehearsed this, but the music is coming on, so you know that that's a good moment, isn't it? I guess you're going to press the button. What a distinct pleasure. Yeah, I am a groupie, so you know. So, do you want to get rid of the bus? No, for me. Done! Come here, please. Okay, that was a drum roll. Okay, basically, I think you've got the point that we're absolutely thrilled after a couple of years of looking at actually how we could work together. At the invitation of our colleagues here, we're absolutely thrilled to be at this point where we can start taking the practical steps. I mean, talk is cheap. We've got to, walk the talk now. And I'm sure you want to say a few words about which steps we're going to take next.
Hi, everyone. We talked, I think there was a question earlier in the day about indexing. How do we measure, how we metrics around diversity inclusion initiatives? And we're absolutely honored and thrilled to have found partnership with Stonewall and KSF to bring the Workplace Equality Index to India. It's a historic moment for us as a country as well. So, as we are with all our organizations who are supporting us in this journey of LGBTI inclusion, it takes a village to get there. Civil society, corporates, LGBTI community, allies, we all have a role to play, and we can only make a difference if we all come together. So we're really absolutely thrilled about this. Thank you, Stonewall, for this, and KSF. Would you like to say something?
No.
Are you sure?
I say too much.
2 words. 2 words, 2 words.
I'm only allowed to say 2 words, and that's thank you. Like Ram said that this takes a village, I really cannot do this without my team. And there's Richa, there's Swati, who've been on this for a very, very long time. And my entire team at the Lalit. It's nice that everyone is recognizing all the efforts that we do here, but honestly, I think I'm more grateful that they are in my life than I'm in theirs. Right, Lush? I'm so glad that we're at this point where we can actually move forward from just decriminalization. I'm also very proud to say that, an industry body like FICCI has also come on board with their diversity and inclusion task force with me and Radhika Piramal as chair and co-chair. The first time ever that they've had in their task force an out gay man and an out lesbian woman to chair and co-chair a task force on diversity and inclusion in 92 years. So I think that's pretty, yeah. With, of course, a very, very, you will hear them, I think they are speaking at some point, Mr. Dilip Chinoy, so you have a FICCI panel. And I think that it's really, I'm just so happy that we're actually sitting at this point. Hopefully this index will make everyone, fight it out with each other, which I think is good and healthy. I think I may have axed my foot on this because I don't think the Lalit can ever be in this index. So I don't know if it's really good for my business or not.
You can be in the global index.
I will put myself in the global index. And thank you, Leanne. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and patience. You've been very much indulging us in this moment. It's going to be, I think, just very positive steps forward, and I really, really crave doing the practical work that we know needs to be done that can honor all of the good corporate citizens here, and there are many in the room, and they deserve to stand up with us and help us work with our national organizations as well as look at the global organizations to really sink our teeth into the very practical changes that need to come. I think I've made the point. It's not a nice world out there for many of us, so let's stick together. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. I thought you...
So, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Srini. It's time to act. Log into workplaceequalityindex.in. The web page is live. You can submit your request right away, and our teams will get in touch with you. Thank you so much for listening in, and we have a few other interesting sessions on the way. Yeah, he will close it.
Thank you, sir, very much, everyone. This is just the start. It has been a brilliant day. When we talk about representation, we have out COO who are LGBT. We have heads of businesses coming and talking about the value of LGBTI inclusion in the workplace. So there's much more to come. Unfortunately, we are tight on time, so we'll break for tea for now. We'll keep it short. Tea is served in Region C, which is just the floor below. Our volunteers will guide you in that. So please make it quick and come back soon, and we will be hearing from our CHROs from moving from intent to action. Thank you very much for joining, and it's a wonderful day ahead, so be with us. Thank you.